The small grocery store owner silently packed a few items, slipped them into the young mother's bag, and gestured that it was free. He didn't ask questions, didn't request anything in return. But the next morning, the entire neighborhood stood frozen as a fleet of armored military vehicles filled the street in front of his store, and a general stepped out. If you believe good deeds come back to you, type YES to spread kindness. Samuel was 58 years old, the owner of a small grocery store in a poor Texas neighborhood. His shop had been open for 20 years, surviving on reputation alone. No fancy signs, no advertising campaigns, just honest service day after day. Late one afternoon, as shadows stretched across the worn linoleum floor, a young woman entered, clutching the hands of two small children. Their clothes were threadbare, their eyes wide with a familiar hunger Samuel had seen too many times before. She carefully selected a few essentials: bread, eggs, some fruit, counting coins in her palm between each item. At the register, her face fell as she counted again. Then once more. The total was 20. She had only 1875. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, attempting to return items. "Maybe just the bread and eggs." The children's eyes followed the fruit as she set it aside. Samuel noticed the girl, no more than 5, grip her brother's hand tighter. Without a word, Samuel bagged everything back up, adding a carton of milk and a box of cookies the children had been eyeing. He gently pushed the bag across the counter. "Ma'am, we don't charge hunger prices here. Please take it." Tears welled in the woman's eyes. "I can't accept, please," Samuel insisted quietly. "It's nothing." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "My husband just got discharged. He's still looking for work and his mother's hospital bills." Her voice trailed off. "You don't need to explain," Samuel replied with a small nod. A customer waiting in line glared at them, muttering just loud enough to be heard, "Charity cases now? Is this a store or a handout center?" Samuel didn't respond. He simply lowered his eyes and continued wiping down the counter, his weathered hands moving in familiar circles across the laminate surface. The woman gathered her bags, whispering a thank you, and hurried out with her children. The impatient customer continued to stare disapprovingly, phone in hand, tapping furiously on the screen. Later that evening, Samuel discovered the disgruntled customer had filmed the interaction, posting it online with the caption, "Local store owner enabling freeloaders killing honest business." Comments were already piling up, some supportive but many echoing the original sentiment. That night, after locking up, Samuel stood alone in the darkened store. The only light came from the street lamps outside, casting long shadows across empty aisles. His fingers traced the edges of an old military medal mounted behind the counter, a small bronze star almost hidden among faded family photos. His face revealed nothing, but his eyes held decades of memories few would understand. By sunrise, the video had spread through local social media channels. The comments section bulged with mockery and attacks, drowning out the few voices of support. "Not surprised if his place gets robbed clean next. He's practically inviting it," wrote a local influencer with thousands of followers. The post received hundreds of likes. Customers who normally stopped in for their morning coffee and newspaper hesitated outside. Some turned away, unwilling to be associated with the store that was quickly becoming a local controversy. Mrs. Morales, who had bought her groceries from Samuel for 15 years, crossed the street to avoid passing his window. When Samuel caught her eye, she looked away quickly, pretending not to see him. At midday, Bradley Knox, an old acquaintance from the local business association, stopped by, leaning across the counter conspiratorially. "Listen, Sam, just some friendly advice. This bleeding heart stuff, it doesn't work nowadays. Nobody appreciates it, and it's bad for business. You can't save everybody." Samuel continued stocking shelves. "Never tried to save everybody, Brad. Just doing what seems right." "Well, right isn't paying your rent, is it?" Thomas gestured to the nearly empty store. "Times change. Gotta adapt." As Thomas left, Samuel turned up his old radio, the news replaced by a Johnny Cash song that filled the empty space. He hummed along quietly, continuing his work as though nothing had changed. That evening, a delivery driver Samuel had known for years pulled up, but didn't bring in his usual supply order. "Sorry, Sam," he said, shuffling uncomfortably. "Boss says we need to hold off for a bit. Something about that video going around, company image and all that." Samuel nodded. "I understand." The driver hesitated. "For what it's worth, my old man was a vet too. Would have appreciated what you did." Samuel looked up, surprised. The driver shrugged. "I noticed your medal years ago, never mentioned it, because you did." After closing, Samuel sat at the small desk in his back office and wrote a note by hand. He taped it to the front door before leaving. "To my valued customers, if my actions have caused anyone discomfort, I accept full responsibility." This store has always aimed to serve this community with dignity. That policy remains unchanged. He locked up and walked slowly home through the quiet streets. His apartment was just 3 blocks away, a small one-bedroom above a laundromat. The sounds of machines rumbling below accompanied him as he sat on his balcony, watching the neighborhood settle into night. His fingers found the identical metal he kept in his pocket, the twin to the one in his store. He rubbed its surface, feeling the raised metal with a thumb that knew every groove and contour. His mind drifted back to desert heat, to faces of men he'd known decades ago, to promises made in moments when tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. Many turned their backs, but he still chose to quietly do what was right. If you believe kindness should never be insulted, type HOPE. The next morning, the rumble of heavy engines broke the usual quiet. Residents peeked through curtains as 5 military transport vehicles parked along the street in front of Samuel's store. Men and women in full uniform emerged, forming a line on the sidewalk. Mrs. Morales, who had avoided the store yesterday, now stood on her porch watching. The local barber stepped outside, apron still on, scissors in hand. Even the teenagers who usually ignored everything, stopped their skateboarding to stare. Neighbors gathered across the street, smartphones raised, recording what was unfolding. Speculation rippled through the growing crowd. Is this about yesterday? Are they shutting him down? Maybe it's a raid. A woman stepped forward from the uniformed group. The same young mother from 2 days before, now wearing a crisp army uniform adorned with service ribbon. Beside her stood her husband in his dress blues, his posture rigid and formal. Their children, now neatly dressed, stood wide-eyed between them. Following them was an older man with silver hair and 3 stars on his shoulder. His presence commanded immediate attention as he approached the store where Samuel stood watching from behind the counter, his expression unreadable. The general entered first, his cap tucked under his arm. The store fell silent as he extended his hand toward Samuel. "Warrant Officer Samuel Reyes," he said, his voice carrying throughout the small space. "It's been a long time." The crowd outside pressed against the windows, straining to hear. "We've come to repay a debt that has remained on our books for far too long." The general continued, "A debt you never asked to be recognized." The young woman stepped forward. "Sir, I recognized your medal when we were here. My husband served with the 75th Rangers. When I described it to him, he knew exactly who you were." Her husband nodded. "The shadow medic, the medic who refused to leave." The general turned to address the growing crowd. "For those who don't know, 30 years ago, in Somalia, Chief Carrington was a combat medic. When our position was overrun, he stayed behind with the wounded, despite direct orders to evacuate. For 16 hours he kept 7 men alive under constant fire until extraction was possible." He paused, his eyes fixed on Samuel. "I was one of those 7 men." The store fell silent. He received the Silver Star, which he never displayed. After discharge, he disappeared into civilian life, never speaking of his service, never seeking recognition. The young woman's husband stepped forward. "When my wife told me what happened here, I contacted my former commander. Word spread through the units. We all wanted to be here today." The local Veterans Association president, who had arrived with the convoy, addressed the crowd. "Not all heroes wear uniforms. Some wear aprons and live by the same code of honor every single day." One by one, each service member approached Samuel, rendering a formal salute that he returned with the precision of muscle memory that had never faded. Outside, the crowd that had gathered to witness a scandal found themselves watching something else entirely, a quiet man finally being seen for who he truly was. That afternoon, people streamed into the small store. They didn't come to buy anything. They came to say thank you. A young boy handed Samuel a hand-drawn card with a simple message: "I want to grow up to be like you." An elderly veteran placed a faded photograph on the counter. A group of young men in desert fatigues, arms around each other's shoulders. "We still remember, Sam," he said, voice breaking. Miss Morales returned with homemade empanadas. "For your dinner," she whispered, eyes downcast. "And I'm sorry for yesterday." The local news crew arrived, but Samuel declined interviews. "The story isn't about me," he said. "It's about remembering that we're all just people trying to get by." Bradley Knox came back too, awkwardly offering to bring coffee for everyone. "Least I could do," he mumbled. The man who'd posted the original video arrived last, deleting it publicly on his phone while everyone watched. "I was wrong," he admitted, the words clearly unfamiliar on his tongue. Samuel stood quietly through it all, one hand resting on his medal, now proudly displayed. A small smile crossed his face, the first many had seen in years. The final visitor was the general, carrying a precisely folded American flag. He presented it to Samuel with formal dignity. The first time in 30 years, Samuel had stood among his brothers and sisters in arms. That night, Samuel sat behind the counter after closing, the folded flag beside him and warm empanadas waiting in a paper bag. He wasn't thinking of medals or headlines, only of the small girl who had smiled as she left the store. He had fed a family, but more than that, he had reminded a city that quiet honor still lives behind humble counters. Some people live their entire lives not seeking applause. They only need to see, once, that kindness is never wrong. You may forget this story in a few days, but if nobody retells it, history will remain silent forever. Subscribe to incredible stories where justice, kindness, and memory are protected until the end.